Thank you for coming. We are starting our session here today with a presentation by Joel. Do you want to introduce yourself and your quick background and what you're doing?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Joel Moore. I am the Director of State Relations with Education Commission of the state. So I also have the opportunity, thank you, to serve as ECS's liaison to the policymakers in New Hampshire. So it's nice to have the opportunity to be up here. On a personal note, I've got family in Epsom and Northwood, so it's nice to get up here to see them. But a little bit about ECS for anyone who's not familiar. We're a national nonpartisan education policy research center based in Denver, Colorado. We were created through the Interstate Compact for Education back in the 1960s. All of the state legislatures and governor's offices got together to create a national policy organization that would monitor and track all education policy information around the country so that we can support you all as education policymakers to make better decisions for y'all students. We are nonpartisan and non-advocacy. We'll never tell you what's right for the students in New Hampshire. Y'all know your state and its specific context the best, and your families and their needs. But what we can do is tell you what's happening in 49 other states and the territories and what that looks like for them so that you could bring that for your students. Hello, hello.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Fantastic. Sue Prentice just texted me, so I'll just read it to you. The weather in Lebanon is horrible this morning. I got that whole squall thing, so all the way through till maybe even Hopkinton, if both are done, but I'm on my way. She's about 10 minutes out, and I just wanted to please let them know we're no, I'm on my way.
Sorry, I should say okay.
Yes, you do.
Well, welcome, Senator. Again, I'm Joel Moore with Education Commission of the States. We are a national nonpartisan education policy group created through the Interstate Compact for Education. Klaus here is our Senior Director of Policy and leads our policy team. How they do their work, they are tracking every piece of education legislation coming out of state houses around the country and monitoring and collecting that info for you and using it to inform our policy work. Some of those pieces that may be of interest, we've got 50 state comparisons on dozens of topics around the country. Some of our more used ones are 50 state comparison on, say, teacher recruitment and retention, which has 24 data points on everything from compensation to grow your own programs, teacher residency programs, anything touching that policy area. Other ones of interest, we've got a brand new 50 state comparison on state accountability systems. Our 50 state comparison on K-12 funding and school facilities construction are both very popular right now, especially up here. Yes, ma'am. No. Yeah.
When you say a 50 state, I'm really interested in seeing these 50
Yes,
state
yeah.
comparisons. What is the accountability thing that you just mentioned?
Sure.
And what is that? What are we accounting?
So it's got, I believe, 9 data points on everything from state ESSA plans to how students are measured, special student populations. Klaus can give more information on that.
Yeah, that's right. It's looking at what the ESSA accountability plans are for
Okay.
states, whether they have their own state accountability plans, excuse me, what kinds of indicators are included in those plans, and including the special ESSA indicators, and others, et cetera. So it's trying to provide the same data points for every state so that you can compare across states what each state is doing for its accountability,
Okay.
together with links and any kind of related legislation.
Is it when we get a chance? I hope to see some of these 50 state
Sure.
comparisons. Are we looking at efficacy of programming, or just people do this
It's
and
more-
here's how they do it, or how it's paid for, or what's?
Any number of things depending on the 50 state, and we have dozens of these, but across different policy areas. They do not tend to look at efficacy because we don't really make judgments about people's policies in those particular 50 states, but more like what they do. So you can actually
it.
look up and see what's going on in other states.
How they're implementing what may have the same name of a program, but
It
They're
may have
doing it
different provisions and
in
different
different
fundings.
states.
Yeah. Exactly.
this is going to be great.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Beyond that, all of these policy reports and 50 state comparisons are available for free on our website, ecs.org. We're here as a service for you. Other resources, if there's ever something that we don't have a specific paper on immediately, our policy team's available for what we call information requests. You're able to reach out directly to me as your liaison in New Hampshire, and they will do an amazing deep dive research into whatever question you have at the state policy level. We're usually able to get a written memo turned around to you in about 3 days. So just always feel free to reach out to me. I've got a card that I'll provide after this, and my email address will be up there also. But here for that. Beyond that, we host monthly regular webinars. We have one coming up in early February that's going to be with the National Assessments Governing Board on the new NAEP scores as those come out. So welcome you and any of your teams to join in on those. I also host regular in-person convenings. Our National Forum on Education Policy each July brings together about 750 policymakers and thought leaders from around the country. So always happy to have you all join for that as well. Let's see. Beyond that, what else am I missing? I think what I want to give you is that we are here as a resource for you. I know that there's a lot on your plates right now. I know you got 4 bills later today. I spent 11 years in the nonpartisan bill drafting office in Colorado, so
Yeah.
I know how much the ability to have some unbiased information on your plates is helpful for the conversation. So I want to, any questions about ECS generally, or otherwise I'll let Klaus share a little bit about the policy trends we're seeing around the country.
Let it rip, Klaus.
Yeah, I'll let it rip. Now,
All right.
yeah,
Let it
so I've already been introduced. Now, my glasses are crooked because I apparently sat on them this morning, so I'm trying to make them look straight. So if they get crooked, my apologies. But I really am pleased to be in New Hampshire. I studied here. My wife has family in Peterborough. We're here every summer. You know, every chance I can get, I'll leap at the chance of coming to this wonderful state. So I'm very pleased to be here. As Joel already mentioned, you know, I oversee the policy team at ECS. We track policy in all 50 states, the District of Columbia, and several state territories. And in 2024, we tracked more than 7,200 bills. We also summarized the bills that were vetoed or enacted. And we've answered more than 400 information requests in 2024, as Joel mentioned. And that's really the formal ones. We even do other ones that are much less formal, like an email that comes to us, and we'll try to turn those around as quickly as we possibly can. We review governor's state of the state addresses to see what they're doing and saying about education and workforce policy. And we probably have hundreds, perhaps thousands of conversations every year across the whole ECS team with state leaders like you. So that's how we get a sense of what's going on. I mean, it gives us a really rich store of information about what's happening in state policy and education and workforce. And so we have seen, you know, there are more trends than these, but these are the ones that we think are really quite big. And there's some others that are probably on the horizon that aren't here that we'll address briefly in the end, because, you know, obviously there's a lot changing right now. But so we've seen a lot of legislation in teaching, in K-12 funding, in school choice. And I know that was something we're going to talk about, private school choice in particular, post-secondary education, early care and education, and career and technical education in the workforce. And so we'll also make this available to you afterwards, so that if you don't catch everything in the notes, because I do have to fly through a little bit, I'm afraid. Now, teaching is perennial. There's always a lot going on in state legislation regarding teaching. And so we're going to talk about three particular areas we've seen being particularly strong. There were at least 120 enacted pieces of legislation that we saw across the states. The first area that was really prominent was what we call paid pathways. This includes things like grow your own programs and teacher residency programs, apprenticeship programs, often at no cost. In that sense, they're not necessarily paid, but it means that you can do that without incurring any sort of additional cost or debt as a prospective teacher. We've also seen stipends and other means of actually compensating student teachers as a means of ensuring that they can get into this pathway without having sort of financial burdens. The second area where we've seen a lot, we call it holistic staffing. Now, what that really means is areas like teacher working conditions, teacher preparation, teacher professional development, and one area we'll talk a little bit more about is professional development for early literacy, which has been huge in lots of states across the country. There's also been a lot of movement in certification and licensure, as there always is. Like, this isn't really a big change, but this is something that has been prominent in 2024. There are, of course, as many of you know, things like the Teacher Mobility Compact, which has 12 states, which allows teachers to transfer their licenses across borders. I know that you're engaged in something rather similar in New Hampshire, so that there's more flexibility of teachers to cross state borders with their certifications and begin to fulfill areas of need. So some quick state examples in the area of professional development. South Dakota allocated funds to support teachers for early literacy professional development. Again, a huge area. A second in West Virginia, this really focuses on the retention of special education teachers, which can often be very difficult. This actually addresses areas of, teacher working conditions for special education teachers, particularly in areas like student-instructor ratios. And by the way, you can absolutely interrupt me because I know I'm flying through a little bit. So Colorado also has an interesting piece of legislation from 2024, which addresses new pathways in shortage areas like CTE, science, or special education. There's alternative certification pathways, particularly for teachers who are in these high demand areas. There's been support for prospective teachers, including things like induction and mentoring for new teachers, but also with prospective teachers, stipends. We see in Utah, there's actually a stipend program now for teachers who are full-time student teachers. That means, again, they can actually get paid while they get this clinical experience, or rather this classroom experience in teaching, and not incur any burden. All right, K-12 funding trends. This is another perennial topic. We see it all the time. K-12 funding has been quite a hot topic, though, in the last few years. We've seen states like Tennessee a couple of years ago completely overhaul its student funding formula. And we've also seen just in the last year, Mississippi and Colorado do something very similar. And this takes different forms. And by the way, I should introduce myself also. Senator Klaus von Zaster with Education Commission of the States, joined by my colleague Joel Moore, also with ECS. And we're talking about big, broad policy trends in state policy. So in K-12 funding, we actually summarized 117 bills last year, which were enacted in 2024. And areas of interest include things like funding formulas. And this can include things like changes to the base K-12 funding amount. Very often it's like minor tweaks, such as increasing base level per student funding so that it indexes to inflation. There can also be changes to supplemental funds or weights allocated to certain populations. Students who are deemed to require more funding or be weighted more heavily than other students because of needs that they might bring to the table. And then finally, there are increases for teacher compensation that have happened in a number of states. Most notably, South Dakota, for example, enacted a minimum teacher salary of $45,000 a year, again, indexed to inflation up to a certain amount. Now, to dig in a little deeper there, we'll just talk about Colorado and Mississippi, which had the biggest K-12 funding changes in 2024. Colorado, which is sort of the home of ECS, overhauled its school funding formulas in several ways. So first, it created a formula that will be phased in over 6 years because it has quite a few cost and other implications. And so some of the bigger changes are that there are significant increases to the amounts of funding for particular groups of students. So for example, students from low income backgrounds will now be weighted 25 to 32% additionally to the sort of base. It used to be 12%, so that's a pretty substantial increase in the weight that they get in the funding formula. To be honest, I'd have to check exactly. Very often it's eligibility for a free and reduced lunch. But, I don't know right offhand if that's what they're using for Colorado. There's been changes in English learners, right? So Colorado was among the states that provided the least supplemental weight for students who were English learners. That was 8% in the past. Now it's going to be 25%. It has also covered special education students. Believe it or not, Colorado didn't weight special education students at all before, but now it will be 25% with this new change to the funding formula. And so this, of course, requires increasing overall state aid, and that's going to happen to the tune of $92 million in the first year, but it could grow up to as much as $570 million when it's fully implemented. And I should add, I'm sorry, I forgot, there's a locale factor, and that means that there will also be some additional weight to students who are in rural areas, that being the locale that is applied in this particular case. And cost of living. I should actually look at my slide before I begin to read it. So there are always some cost of living adjustments, but those tend to be capped according to various provisions of the legislation. So now let's look at Mississippi. Mississippi very similarly has overhauled its student funding formula. Although with Mississippi, there's no phase-in period. It will happen really all at once, though some districts will be held harmless for up to 3 years as they try to implement this new funding formula. And so again, there is a new base, as in Colorado, that will be base funding per student that is indexed to inflation. But again, more weight for students from various groups, including students from low-income backgrounds. This is a really substantial increase in the weight. It used to be 5%. Now it's going to be 30% additional weight for those students. And there's something they've added to this, which is called a concentration factor. And that is students who are in schools with high concentration of other students who come from low-income families will get an additional weight on top of the weights you see here. Now, English learners will be weighted as well. This is entirely new. They were not weighted at all in the prior formula. They will have a 15% weight in this case. And special education, you'll see rather substantial weights of 60 to 130%. And this replaces a totally different approach that was happening in the States, which was called resource-based allocation, which is when you pay for the resources, like the teachers, the facilities, and all of that, instead of paying by student. In this case, you're paying by student and giving them this additional weight so that you can cover the various needs. And then career and technical education, this is a new weight for students in career and technical education, will get an additional 10%. The costs to implement this formula are estimated at $220 million per year. And then let's move on quickly to school choice. I know this has been an area of hot discussion in New Hampshire as elsewhere. So there has been a lot of conversation in school choice. We tracked more than 1,000 bills since 2021 at the state level in school choice, and nearly 120 of which have been enacted. So this has been quite a surge. And they typically fall into various primary areas. One of them is eligibility. So in the past, as many of you may know, private school choice eligibility tended to be limited to certain student populations, and it tended not to apply to students who were already in private schools. Now, but states have been trying to expand existing programs recently to universal or near universal eligibility. That is students where all students are entitled to receive or at least apply for assistance. Now, according to a recent report by a group called Future Ed, something like 40% of the nation's 50 million public elementary and secondary students right now are eligible for public subsidies under these new expanded rules in states. Now, some states are creating new programs that will actually phase in universal eligibility. For example, Iowa and Arkansas progressively expand student eligibility based on things like income level and previous public school attendance, but eventually they too plan to get to 100% eligibility. Indiana is a state that, for example, has expanded eligibility by really increasing the cap at which you can receive this kind of subsidy from the state. And that includes like 400% of the level of 3 and reduced price lunch, which actually expands it dramatically compared to what the eligibility was before that happened. I think in New Hampshire, the education freedom accounts are at about 350% of free and reduced price lunch levels. So that's something we're seeing in a number of different states. Now, universal programs are typically education savings accounts, which are publicly funded, and they typically pay for expenses like school tuition, tutoring, therapies, instructional materials, that sort of thing. That seems to be the most common mechanism for this work recently. Now, it's been appearing in various kinds of research reports recently that these universal eligibility programs tend to serve middle to higher income families more than the more targeted programs do. And often this is because in some cases, people who are already sending their students to their kids to private school see this as a way of, offsetting that expense. In some cases, the vouchers or the amounts of the savings accounts don't actually cover all of the school tuition, or in some cases, there are selective private schools that don't accept students. So sometimes they haven't seen quite the uptake of these programs from students who are already in public education to begin with, as they may have expected. Now, regarding funding, in some cases with these universal programs, there has been more uptake broadly than some states budgeted for. Because when you have a lot of people accepting these kinds of subsidies for a universal program, it can cost more than you thought. So for example, in Arizona, I think they had a budget commitment of nearly $700 million in 2023 and 2024, in which there was roughly $300 million of new funding for the program. And so to contain the scale of some of these programs, whether you have education savings accounts or vouchers or whatever the mechanism might be, some states are actually setting funding caps in their legislation or enrollment caps. So for example, Oklahoma's program caps their tax credit program, another mechanism for providing funds for these kinds of public school enrollments, at $250 million. Utah has also had a cap, but they recently increased it to $90 million. So there are various mechanisms states are exploring to try to manage the costs of these programs. There are also some states that begin to create like tiers of how much money you're actually going to give through these various programs that are indexed to income. So in other words, families that have higher income will get less state money, whereas families with lower incomes get more state money. Another means of trying to manage the cost of these programs. Some states that have begun to limit their program budgets have also started to reprioritize specific groups of students. And these tiers of funding can be one way of doing that. Now, I don't want to go too far into accountability and oversight for these programs because it gets very complex, but there are several ways of doing this. Now, education savings accounts laws provide accountability and oversight often to ensure that you can actually audit accounts to make sure that people are using the money for its intended purpose. That's one kind of oversight and accountability. In some states, actually, there are provisions where parents actually have to report academic progress of their students to the state if those students are receiving education savings accounts or other kinds of public school choice benefits. So in Utah, for example, students actually have to submit a portfolio documenting the academic progress they've made annually if they're part of those programs. There's some states, for example, in Florida, where students need to reach a certain attendance threshold to continue being eligible for the voucher funds that they get. And in this case, it's 80% attendance. If they fall below that, they lose their eligibility. So there are a whole host of other kinds of accountability provisions that are being considered by states as they look at private school choice. One important, do you have a question?
I do, Chair Ward, may I? Thank you. So as you're talking about accountability and oversight in particular, any of these states, I didn't hear it in the first few examples that you gave, just do a baseline check of eligibility every year to make sure the people in the children in the program meet the requirements that have been set forth in law?
Yeah, it's typically through an application process for those that aren't universal. And I can get, we can dig into the details of that, but very
Okay.
often it's, you have to, as with other kinds of,
Publicly
grants,
funded
grants, public
programs?
funding programs, you
Thank-
have to apply and show that you're eligible, meet certain income limits and all of that sort of thing.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. But we can get more detail on that by various states.
Just want to remind you, we have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, well, you know what? I'm going to kick it into high gear. We have notes in these as well, slides that can help you
Thank
look
you.
at that. So there are state examples. Alabama and Utah are actually worth looking into, but they're fairly straightforward and like a lot of others. And so you can find them here in this presentation. Very quickly on post-secondary trends, there's a lot of work in post-secondary affordability and finance. This is particularly to offer specific groups financial aid and support if they're in pathways that go to high demand fields such as teaching and healthcare. So very often it's targeting these kinds of funds to the kinds of fields that are most in demand. There are trends in admissions policy. So several state legislatures have considered bills around various policies, including things like addressing legacy admissions. Some states like Maryland don't think there should be legacy admissions or placing restrictions on that for their state-funded universities. And then also changes to things like automatic admissions policies, where you get admitted to state universities if you reach certain thresholds, for example, in test scores or grades or in some other kinds of indicators that they use for that. And then finally, outcomes-based funding. We see several states looking to create funding systems that actually incentivize success, looking at things like ensuring that there are good workforce outcomes or other kinds of indicators that they can measure outcomes by, and then provide more funding to those institutions that are able to meet those kinds of indicators. I am actually going to skip past the state examples. You'll have to forgive me because I know we have a few more to do, but you can find these again in the actual presentation. Now, early care and education, again, some trends going on there. We have workforce and provider supports. This basically means that, especially with COVID, there were a lot of challenges in actually supporting early care and education as students were staying home, and there were all kinds of other changes to the dynamics of that whole economy. And so states have been stepping up both to sustain the early care and education workforce and the providers who employ them through a variety of means, like improving compensation, creating better career pathways for people who want to be in early care and education as professionals, and also providing grants or subsidies, for their education. And I think very importantly, ensuring that the early care and education workforce itself is eligible for childcare subsidies, because very often the people in the workforce don't have the wherewithal to ensure that their own children have early care and education. There are a lot of policies to expand access, including resetting subsidy and reimbursement rates for the work, sort of reframing zoning regulations to make it cheaper to have, care and education sites in different places across communities, and also creating more coordinated enrollment policies across a lot of different diverse programs that make it easier for parents then to navigate that whole landscape. And then finally, we made mention of this earlier, early literacy and numeracy are very big areas of focus. Literacy has been for a while because we had the notion of the science of reading. That seemed to be very compelling and motivated a lot of states to produce policies in that area. There is an emerging emphasis now on early numeracy. The challenge being, however, that there isn't as nearly as settled a science of mathematics or numeracy that can guide state action here. So that's still an emerging field that we're watching with some interest. Yeah, so I'm almost at the end. I'm going to pop past those state examples and just conclude with CTE and workforce trends, student debt for high demand fields. We want to alleviate students, so states would like to alleviate student debt for those entering specific fields and occupations that are in high demand. There are work-based learning pathways that states have been doing, and this incorporates work-based learning with CTE and classroom learning, and also creating greater partnerships between agencies and different kinds of industry partners to ensure that things are actually rooted in real industry demand. And finally, funding these CTE and workplace pathways with funding particularly targeted to high demand fields, areas where we believe that there will be a lot of job growth and opportunity for people. Now, state the examples again, you can see other education trends quickly. AI may transform the world in ways that we can't even entirely anticipate, but we're following that. Post-secondary affordability is very much on the screen, making sure that post-secondary education is much more affordable for people. Student health and wellness is a big one that's still lingering from the pandemic, and it's not here, but I would add rapidly changing federal policies. You know, I don't think we all know how that's going to shake out yet, but that's a big area of focus for us as we see what happens in that space. And I think maybe I landed precisely at 9:30, and that's the end.
Time is essentially up, so you're going to provide the slideshow for us. You can send it to Ryan, and he can just distribute it to the rest of us. And that would be very helpful. And you are available for questions and for help if we're looking for some specific topic.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes,
And next time you do something like this, how much time do you need? 45 minutes, an hour?
We could do it in 45. We can do it in whatever you need.
Okay, well, today I've only set aside 30 minutes, so
Sure.
I'm
Fair
going to
enough.
have to
Absolutely.
close it at this point. So
We appreciate you having
thank
us.
you very much
Thank
you.
for
Bye-bye.
being here and for giving us this information.
Our pleasure.
Okay. Gonna shift gears a little bit. So I will open up the public hearing, in the Senate Education Committee. And Senator Prentice, would you do the honors of saying pledge? Yep, because we haven't done that yet.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Our first bill is Senate Bill 69, and we have a prime sponsor here.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Senator Keith Murphy, representing the people of District 16. You may recall an issue that was highly publicized last year in which there was a community that had several family members that had run up school debt for lunches. A local church approached the school board, the business administrator offered to cancel the debt, and the administrator instead chose to take those families to court and not only turn down the offer of the donation, said he would speak against it at the school board. And in an interview that I've provided copies of to you, he said that the district could not accept the funding anyway because there's no policy allowing it to do so. And the key line here for me, from my perspective, is district will start getting extra state funding for the children in the free and reduced lunch program. So it looked to me as if the administrator really was geared towards steering people towards that program in order to get more aid, and to the point that he was willing to turn down the donation. I found it, and I know many people found it confusing, why a business administrator would choose to take families to court that are clearly in financial difficulties rather than accept a donation from people that were actively seeking to pay off that debt. So this bill seeks to address that issue, and what it does is essentially provide everywhere that school boards take gifts, provides the new language you see in lines 4 and 5, provided that such gifts shall only be rejected by the school board after being discussed and voted on in a public session. So it does allow a school board to turn down gifts, but it simply makes it so that they must discuss their reasons why and vote on it in public session. I can foresee some situations where it might make sense to turn down a gift. There are some organizations that perhaps the school board thinks is unwise, not morally acceptable, unethical to take money from. But the local church down the street, I think, is not one of them. So if they are going to turn down a gift, they should tell the voters why. And that's the reason for the bill. It's a pretty simple, straightforward piece of legislation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions from the committee members? Senator Art Schiller?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Murphy, for bringing this forward and for providing, I remember this. And I remember this, and I remember being as gobsmacked, like, what? Like, how, why not? But what I'm wondering, though, is that, is this us overreaching instead of, the Goffstown community has an opportunity to revise their own policy, right? Because from what I understand, it really, really caused a lot of consternation in town, and it was, it was a hot topic. So would it not be, I mean, talking it out here, giving, that was an opportunity for the town of Goffstown, right, to revisit the people that they are putting in positions to make this policy, or lean on the people who are there to revise the policy. I agree with you. I did not understand their reasoning at all. I thought it was misguided, but also a little weary about the state leaping in to create a policy for school boards. I'm just want to hear your thoughts on that while we're talking it out. Yeah.
Thank you. And I don't see this as a left or right issue. This is just a
No,
common
no.
sense issue from my
Yeah,
perspective.
just policy versus,
I think it's very common
legislation.
for us in the state legislature to step in and dictate certain aspects of local
Yeah.
decision making, and that's what I'm trying to do here. Again, I'm not saying they must accept the gift. I'm simply saying that if they turn it down, they need to say why, and they owe it that to the voters. I would only say also, I'd point out that in this case, the business administrator is not elected. He's hired by the school board. So the school board would have to turn over essentially, and then they'd have to fire this gentleman. Not that I want anybody fired, but they'd have to counsel him otherwise. And also, in the article, it says that the administrator, I'm looking at the back page 5 or 6, he informed the board at the August meeting that he had initiated the lawsuits, but elsewhere in the article, I don't see it right now, but elsewhere in the article, it does say that the school board did not make it clear that he had ever approached them with the gift. So the church went to the administrator. The administrator said, no, thank you. If you bring this to the board, I'll say no. But it's not clear that he ever went to the board and even informed them the offer had been made. So the decision wasn't even made by anyone that's elected. It was made by somebody who was appointed. So,
thank you. Okay.
yes, ma'am, thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Sullivan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Murphy. So when I'm reading this, it just looks like enabling legislation. Like they had said there wasn't a mechanism, so to speak, to accept these funds. Is this just enabling
It would
legislation?
certainly force them to have a policy. One of the reasons they gave for not taking the money was we don't have a policy allowing us to take the money. That's kind of a cop-out in my opinion, because simply have the meeting and have a policy, create a policy. That doesn't take very long. But it would force them to have a policy to take the gift. And says that you have to vote to take it or not take it in public session.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Prentice?
Great. Senator Murphy, not a question, just a comment. Something like this happened in Keene, except school administrator didn't go after, didn't choose to sue. And the headline is panel pushes any lunch debt policy changes to full Keene school board. So there you
Thank you. I
go.
was unaware of that it had happened.
Yeah, it was not too long after that. I remembered it. So I just, thank God for Google. Okay. But there you go. So thank you.
Senator Abbas?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. I'm not sure how every town does it, but don't towns already have a policy that say like the police department or fire department gets a donation? Doesn't it still have to be whether the select board or town council has to vote to approve that donation?
It is extremely common for towns, both at the school level, the town level, to have policies allowing them to take gifts of property, money, you name it. A lot of our town parks came from gifts like that.
Thank you.
Neely? Senator Altshuler?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. My only question is, and maybe I'm not seeing it as I read it before, is that if this were in place, they, Goffstown would have had to go through the process, right? And this says that you can only, if you reject them, it has to be discussed and voted on in public session. Would we not want to also have the discussion of accepting? Like accept or reject? I mean, we have it in line 2, each public school and local school board may seek and accept public and private gifts, grants. And we know, like, the running club gets t-shirts from local businesses and that kind of thing. But if would we want to, like, in the effort of transparency, because it also shows publicly like who's stepping up in the community and who's participating, like the accept and reject.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Senator, the language that's there was clearly put in by OLS. I would certainly welcome any amendment
Yeah.
to expand that to include acceptance and rejection, if that's the wisdom of the committee.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator Abbas?
I think that's a great point about accepting gifts. But I just want your opinion on this. I know where I live, some of those sports teams, they all have these fancy warm-ups now that it didn't have when I was playing sports. So every year I like to donate the exact amount that would cost to buy one uniform in case there's a student on there that can't afford it. But I feel like if they had to approve it, perhaps it would maybe point out the identity of the student who can't afford it. So I understand in transparency reasons that may sound good, but would that perhaps have some unintended consequences?
I mean, having a very long meeting in which they vote over and over again to accept small gifts of $100 here and $100 there, it's possible.
I never know which athlete gets the warm-up suit that I pay for, but I don't feel it's important which one gets it because it's really an income issue. So, but perhaps if this had to be done in public, maybe that their privacy might be a little. They may not want to be identified in front of the whole
It's a valid
town
reason.
as someone who can't afford it. So, I appreciate the point of my colleague, but I also
That's a valid reason for opposing such an amendment and going with the current language. At the end of the day, I think that's for this committee to decide. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. As long as they're not suing people instead of taking money that's being offered to them by a church. I think that's, without saying why, I think that's confusing.
Any further questions?
thank you.
All set?
All set.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
We have 7 minutes for the next
We have a minute.
7 minutes.
They are amazing.
I didn't get a plate of cookies. They get a plate of cookies.
Yes.
At 10 o'clock, it's the governor's banquet. That's all.
You have kids coming in at 7.
At 10.
At 10, are you going to leave the hearing to go and visit the kids?
I have to give notice.
Oh, is it a school- is it a school class?
Yeah.
It's the governor, the kid governor
Oh,
today.
oh, yeah, okay.
On this queen's house, and we'll get another kid.
So they're going to be in chamber at 10?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Victoria Sullivan. I represent Senate District 18, which is Manchester, South End, and the town of Litchfield. And I am introducing Senate Bill 97FN. It's an intra-district school choice bill, which means that any child could attend any school within their district. The reason that this bill is important, especially for larger towns and cities, is because I had a situation where a family came to me because a grandmother was able to take care of their grandchild before and after school, but didn't live in the district that the parents lived in, like the school area the parents lived in. She had a school, elementary school right down the street, walking distance, but the child was assigned a school on the other side of town. And when they went to ask for permission for this, they were turned down. Eventually, we had to go to the department. I helped them. We went to the Department of Education, and they were able to persuade the superintendent to give them access to that school. But had that not happened, the child would have had to be in care before school, then they had school, and then care after school. By transferring them over to the other school district, they were dropped off with the grandparents in the morning, spent time with them, had a wonderful morning with them, went to school, and then the grandparents walked to the school, picked them up, and brought them home with them. And it changed everything for this family. A child went from potentially being in school from 7:30 a.m. until 6 o'clock p.m. to being in the care of family outside of school hours. The other thing is we have a lot of issues of bullying. We hear about it all the time. And for some families, the only way out of that situation is to get them out of that school. So this would allow parents to take children out of a bullying situation and put them into a brand new school environment. And the bottom line is that people in towns and cities are all paying the same tax rate, yet their children are segregated by what zip code they live in. And in a city like Manchester, that's a big difference. That can be a really big difference from one neighborhood to another. And this gives the parents the ability to choose a school as long as there's capacity in the school. That's the only caveat. There has to be capacity at that school. This benefits transient students. In Manchester, we have a lot of kids that move from one apartment to another apartment, which would change their school that they attend. And this would benefit them by allowing them to stay in the same school, again, as long as the parents provided transportation, so that wouldn't be a burden on the district. This is also for people that are opposed to EFAs. This is a great alternative by keeping kids in their own school district. So I've had a lot of support on this. A lot of parents reached out to me. They're in support of this. We even had some support from our Manchester School Board that would be open to this, especially they see it a big benefit when it comes to the high schools. But we're also seeing some areas where some school populations are overcrowded and there's room in the other buildings. And this just allows parents the ability to shift their child to another school that is better suited to them. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair Ward. Thank you, Senator Sullivan, for taking my question. So I'm just looking for clarification.
Okay.
Is like the situation you described sounded like, it was a one-off, but it could happen again. And so you handled it in a constituent capacity. And then you've described transient populations where there's movement between apartments, and you talked about, children who are having, like I say, like a bullying problem, which is very serious. So is this just blanket, like they can just go, or do they have to, apply on a case-by-case basis?
So thank you for the question. So in the bill itself, it states that they have to let the superintendent of schools know prior to the end of the school year, prior to July 1, I believe it is. And they have to, of course, review if there's capacity in the school. So that's the only caveat. If they are in a situation where they are in harm's way, if there's a bullying situation or something that changes within the family, then they have to actually go to the superintendent and apply and present a case to them, because it's the middle of the school year and it's going to be difficult to sort that out.
Follow up. So thank you, Senator Sullivan. So could this continue to be handled on a case-by-case basis? And do you have two parts? And do you have do you have a number or a sense of how much this is actually happening or needs to happen?
Thank you for the question. I can tell you, I know Manchester, right? That's where I live, that's
Right.
my constituency, up until this point. And it happens more frequently than you would imagine, especially when it comes to bullying. And especially that bullying is often on the bus. But, the kids that are being bullied and the parents that go to the principal and then eventually to the superintendent, and they're just like, nope, we're just going to keep your kid in that situation. And so what we end up having a lot of these families go to the EFAs because it's their only way out, or they homeschool because it's their only way out. It happens a lot, and the superintendent will say no. And in many cases, former school board member from Manchester, John Avard, was a big advocate for this when he was on the school board, because he saw it all the time. It would actually alleviate a lot of problems in the school environment, and a lot of kids that are being bullied, and some of the hostility, just relation. Not everybody gets along, right? And some kids walk into school and they've got that one person that just makes their life miserable, and it helps them get out of that situation. But again, also trying to keep some stability for kids that are transient. They go from one school to another, depending on what their zip code is. And this actually helps with our most underserved kids and gives them some stability in their education.
Okay, for now, good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Sullivan. I have a couple of questions. So on line 6, the whole sentence is, change the student's school or assignment to another specific public school, public academy, or an approved private school within the district. When the process we have now, if a family wants to move their student to a private school, they have the avenue of EFAs. Is this line saying that this would bypass the EFAs?
So in hardship and in some circumstances, the parents can present a case that allows the school district to actually tuition them into a private school. That's already existing law. So what we're
Okay.
changing is adding another situation where they don't have to present a case. The child isn't, it's not necessarily that they have to present a case bringing forward. It's not a hardship situation. It's the parents have decided that this is the best course for their child. So they can just go to the superintendent and say, this is what we want, without presenting a full case. And it would only be inter-district public school. It wouldn't be for private school. That private school caveat is already in law.
May I follow up? So I understand how the private school placement works currently in law, and that's through the process of manifest hardship or through a special education, not being able to have special education needs met, having really critical special education needs that have to go to a boarding school or a day school kind of situation. Get that. But this reads, when it says an approved private school, I'm confused about what the approved would be. And I'll tell you that I actually took a whole slew of these bills with me because I met with a couple of my superintendents to get their eyes on it. Read this as administrator and as an educator, and bring me through your point of view. And I'm concerned about the private school being in there because, for instance, since the beginning of this bill, or the way this bill is outlined, it allows parents to skip over or bypass the manifest hardship pathway, which is one that is in place specifically to deal with those issues with which you just mentioned about bullying or not thriving in a school or not getting the special education needs met. I mean, we have manifest hardship in place specifically to address those. So my concern is if we skip all of that, and let's say in my district, if a parent wants to just say, I don't want my child to go to Exeter Area High School, I'd prefer they go 4 miles down the road to Phillips Exeter Academy. This reads that the Exeter area cooperative district taxpayers would be paying to send that child to Phillips Exeter Academy, whereas we have an EFA program that would allow those parents to say, okay, I want my child to go to a private school. This is the private school closest. Why would we not guide them into the EFA?
So thank you for your question. So in the very first part, which is what I believe you're referring to, the only part that's changing, they strike out if the parent or guardian believes it would be in the best interest of a student, and it actually puts that later on. What this bill actually changes is at line 24. In determining whether to authorize a request to transfer to another school within the district, the superintendent shall consider only whether the specifically requested school has the ability to accommodate the student based on teacher-student ratio and existing school capacity. In determining whether it's best interest of the student to change the student's school or assignment to a school outside the district, the superintendent shall consider the student's academic, physical, personal, and social needs. That goes back to the hardship.
May I
Right,
follow
so
up?
we're looking at 24, the bottom of that first page.
First page.
No, I see. May I follow up?
Follow up.
I see that. I'm with you. And I see how in a larger district like your own in Manchester, you've got, I don't know how many elementary schools are in Manchester, 3 or 4, maybe 5.
Oh, keep going.
Oh, is it? We have a different setup because I'm in a more rural area. So thank you for, sharing that experience. But again, going back to line 6, you have in there, or an approved private school within the district. And right now, in order to access the EFA program, virtually every private school are listed as approved private schools. So my confusion is, if rather than going to Exeter Area High School, a parent wants to go 4 miles away because it's super close and it's essentially in the district geographically, but it's not in the district because it's not part of the public school system. How are we determining interdistrict and adding in all of the private schools? We have Heronfield Academy in Exeter on the Hampton Falls line. And so if I'm a parent and I want to send my middle schooler over to one of these schools, to Heronfield, which is super close, right? But then also, does that mean if I'm coming out of Hampton Falls, the Hampton Falls taxpayers are on the hook for paying a $30,000 tuition because I've chosen to bring my kid to Heronfield and opted not to be part of the EFA program? So keeping the private schools in line 6 is where I'm getting hung up on the intra-district.
Right, but again, I believe that's already existing law. What
No.
we're changing is the bottom for hardship.
There's no hardship there's no manifest hardship that then sends a child to a school, a private school at $30,000. We have children going in for special education that are those needs are not being able to be met at the private school, at the public schools special education programming because the school doesn't have the resources in order to meet that child's exceptional needs. We don't. Manifest hardship has never been used to send a child to Phillips Exeter Academy or Heronfield Academy or St. Paul's. That's not the way that manifest hardship is used in the state. And this bit of legislation, and only really line 6, is where we are now introducing a whole new cost to a district where a parent doesn't have to demonstrate any sort of manifest hardship and just like, hey, by the way, I've enrolled my kid down the street at Heronfield. It's $30,000. Here's the bill. Like, how do taxpayers account for that? How do we budget for that? And why would we even have an EFA program if we're just gonna like let people's kids go wherever?
Thank you for the question, and I'm happy to look at that and get back to you with the answer, but like I said, I believe that most of this language is already an existing law, but I will get back to you on it. And I'm willing to entertain an amendment on it, of course, but what the part that we're really looking at is lines 24 to 29, where it's, really a interdistrict transfer for students. And the only thing we're basically changing is that parents don't have to build a case on it, for it.
Okay, may I follow up? Thank you. Thank you for taking a look at that bit in line 6. I think for interdistrict, that makes a tremendous difference, particularly since we have the avenue of EFAs available. So my next question is that it seems to change the best interest determination by a superintendent to be one only of capacity and student teacher ratio for intra-district placements. And so that is absolutely a scheduling and staffing issue that would have to be dealt with at the particular school level. But what concerns me and what has been raised as a red flag from educators in my district, particularly last night, was that when somebody wants to go out of the district, right? And let me use the example that was given to me so that we could kind of visualize it last night. I have a school, I've got 3 special education students that are going to be in this particular 2nd grade classroom, right? And so in figuring out the matrix of where my educators are going to be, where my paraprofessionals are going to be, and where I am going to place my special education students across the grade based on their needs, I have determined as the superintendent that, okay, based on the IEPs for these 3 kids, I can best support them with 1 para, right? And in that classroom. However, June 30th rolls around, right? And that one of the parents of that student decides, I'm going to move my student to another district, in another town, in another school district altogether. And because they can do that based on student enrollment capacity, right? Which doesn't include the capacity of educators to provide that integrated education for special education students. It's just looking at flat out numbers. Now I've got this student that, as the sending district, according to your legislation, I'm responsible for paying for that kid's special education 3 towns over in another district. So now I have to provide a para for them over here, where they would have been covered by the para that they had in their home district. So now my district is paying for a para to address 2 special education kids in 2nd grade here in my hometown. And we are also now paying for the para to follow the kid who was moved out of district. So that's special education funds that are now going to another school. Is that, like, I
So
wonder
it
if that was an
states that-
unintended consequence.
Thank you for the question. It says that out of district has to be approved by the superintendent and based on certain needs, right? At the bottom.
Right.
It says a school outside the district, the superintendent shall consider the student's academic, physical, personal, and social needs, which is the way that it happens already. Right? And a parent has the ability at any time to take their child out of district if they chose to anyway. Like, there's always that, like the school that's set up in your example was at the end of the year, the school year's over, looking forward to the next year. There are kids that come into the school district or out of the school district over the summer all the time.
Right.
So I don't understand sort of a situation where you're set up for the district for the next school year in the end of June or by July 1 and don't anticipate some flexibility going into September. Right? Kids are always moving over the summertime. You always get new students or students leave.
Yes, may I,
Could we have?
yeah, may I ask my next question? Because I think Senator Sullivan teed me up there. Okay,
I-
so
I would like
yes.
to speak to this.
Yes, so regarding that, right, this is something that we talked about last night, is, so it's a logistics, right? What happens if 5 open slots get filled up based on the student-teacher ratio or capacity? And then, right, because we're filling up, it's July 1. Now, everybody who wants to move is moving. But then my school gets several families that move into town where they are entitled to go, but my capacity has now been filled because I haven't left space for the students who live in my town. So now I'm over capacity. Do I send the students who don't live here back out? What do we do?
I mean, that happens in larger districts all the time, right? So you've got students that move into an area that's overpopulated and they have kids that move in that they weren't expecting. You're talking about 1 or 2, like you're not getting 30 kids that move in over the summer. Do you know what I mean? Like it's 1 or 2
I would-
kids that would be moving around.
In the rural districts, it's actually not, that's a very different, that may be true in an urban district where, there's a minimal amount of movement. But in the rural districts, budgeting for special education, particularly high impact students, right? There is a finite amount of capacity, and there is room that is factored in for knowing that we've got this development that's opening, or knowing that, we usually have a turnover of, so many kids. But if we eliminate that buffer by July 1,
Right, so what you just stated is that the school districts take that into consideration anyway. So when you're talking about capacity, that would be the buffer that they use when they're considering if they have capacity to bring somebody in. Same situation.
okay.
Yeah, I think
So
I'll
we're
limit
good.
the discussion
Yeah,
and
thank you.
allow somebody else to come in. And we can talk about this.
Thank you, Senator.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Gary Fruit. And since we're running a little bit late here, if you have something new, that would be great.
Thank you, Chairman Ward. And my name is Jerry Frew, the Associate Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Administrators Association. Thank you to the committee for allowing some time to speak today. I'll try to keep it very brief. Some of the points that I was going to make have been made by Senator Altschuler, and so I appreciate you keeping the impact on rural school districts in mind. I have had some experience in the Manchester situation as well, in a role of when I was doing some school approval work for the Department of Education, and had the opportunity to visit many of the Manchester schools during that. So I can certainly understand and see the difference between the flexibilities in Manchester and the flexibilities in, say, SAU 16 or some of the regional districts, Kearsarge, for example. We understand and appreciate this legislature's appetite for providing choice for parents. We get it. We simply ask that careful, thoughtful consideration to be made to the final product of what that looks like. And I'd like to bring to light just bills in this committee today have contradictory language in this bill to a bill later on today regarding transportation. One piece. One bill says transportation is the responsibility of the parents. Another bill says parents can bring children to a spot. If they live out of the district, they can bring to a bus stop in the district, and the resident district will then transport the student to the school of choice. That's contradictory language. I think some of we appreciate these bills, but there are several bills in both chambers that bring about contradictory language. I honestly believe in my heart that we're creating a lawyer's plethora of opportunity if we move forward with all of these bills. I would encourage this committee and the one across the street
House.
to pump the brakes. Let's get it right. This has implications for families. It has implications for children. It has implications for taxpayers. It has implications for every school district in this state. Maybe, because I'm not quite sure that the implications up above the notch are the same as the implications in Nashua, Manchester, and Concord. And so, we would just encourage you to take some time, address how the selection process is made. If a resident school, for example, one of the Manchester schools gets more requests at a grade level than they can accommodate, how did they determine who they're going to take? Is it first come, first serve? Is it a lottery like the public charter schools do? Do you say, all right, here's the lottery date. If you want to move your child, get your request in by then. Okay, we've got 5 requests and we only have 2 slots. How do we choose which one? And then there are a lot of issues that can emerge as a result of that. So, again, I know that there are other folks who want to talk about this. I just ask mindful, careful consideration to all of these bills. Representative Leon yesterday presented this, a version of this bill across the street. And we brought up in line 9, or an approved private school which is outside the district, right? When you look at the act relative to inter-district public school transfers, and then on line 9, you talk about private school transfers, there's something a bit confusing about that. So just an appeal to get it right, please. It's an important piece of legislation. All of them are. The choice ones are important, but they're a mess.
Yeah, very good point.
Thank you, Chair.
Any questions from the House members? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Barry Christina.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Barry Christina, Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Boards Association. To be clear, we're neutral on this bill. We're not taking a position. Rather, I wanted to testify just to raise a couple questions that NHSBA has, and some of those may have already been addressed. Mr. Frew just spoke about what happens if you get more requests than you have capacity. With respect to that, NHSBA would request that perhaps an amendment be brought forward allowing a school board to adopt their own policy relative to handle that. One school board may want to do a lottery, another school board may want to do on a first come, first served basis. Whatever that is, I mean, if the legislature wanted to dictate whether it was a lottery or first come, that would certainly be your prerogative. But we would simply ask that a line be included in the bill allowing school boards to adopt a policy to address the instances in which you have more requests than you do capacity. The other aspect that I have too, and this came up yesterday during Representative Leon's bill, the line says that you can, for intra-district transfers, the only reason it can be denied is for, or the only considerations are for student ratio and existing capacity. There was discussion at Senator, and it came up earlier today too, about bullying and social welfare and things of that nature. We know some of those are more in the manifest ed aspects than they are in the best interest, but just another consideration for the committee as well too. I think that's about it. One point, as I'm reading the bill and looking at the existing law, Senator Altshuler, to your question and concerns about the first sort of paragraph on page 1, lines 7 through 11 that talk about sort of the private school placement. I think that's already in law. As I was reading the new language in bold, I think that's simply reiterating a few things that are already in the best interest aspect further down the line. So example, if you were to jump to page 2, line 1, paragraph F, if the superintendent finds that it's in the best interest of the student to change the student's school or assignment, I'm not going to read the new language, just the existing language. The superintendent shall initiate 1, a change of assignment within the student's current assigned school, 2, the student's transfer to another public school or public academy within the district of residence, or 3, the student's transfer to a public school public academy or approved private school in another district. So that's already in law, both under the best interest aspect and the manifest educational hardship aspect that's further down in RSA 193.3. Districts and superintendents are already allowed to assign students to private schools if they believe it's in the best interest of the child or if the parents establish that there is a manifest educational hardship. So I'm reading page 1, lines 6 through 12 or whatever it is simply reiterating what's already further on in law, not really creating any new right for parents to take to attend a private school with the district picking up some of the tuition. So I think those are some of the only comments that NHSBA has. Again, we're neutral on the bill. Just wanted some clarifying questions about if you reach capacity and then a family moves into that sort of district or ward, if you will, what happens to that family? But anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deborah House.
Good morning,
Welcome.
Chairman Ward. Nice to be back at Senate Education. My name is Deborah Howes. I am president of the American Federation of Teachers, New Hampshire. We have 3,500 members across the state, mostly in K-12, pre-K-12 public education, as well as university faculty and public employees in cities and towns across the Granite State. And I am here today to oppose this bill, not because we oppose parents having a choice, but because this is putting the cart before the horse. All Granite State children have the right to the opportunity of a robust public education. That's an education where they have small class sizes, all the academic and behavioral support they need if they need it at school. They have a robust curriculum, and we know that our Granite State public schools do not offer that same equal opportunity in every district and even in every school within the same district. And that is because for the past more than 30 years, the state has not solved the riddle of how to adequately fund that education for every district so that that opportunity is the same across the state. So we cannot support any of these bills at this time because you would just be making that opportunity more unequal for our students. I'm going to go to some specific objections we have to this bill. Some of them have already been brought up, but the first one is that it is a shall. It requires districts to grant parental request for transfer, barring the limited circumstance of not having enough space or not having enough teachers when figured out, using the ratio. And that's not necessarily classroom teachers. They look at all the people holding teaching certificates and just take an average. It does not define best interest of the child clearly in the bill. So that's a very squishy standard. And is it based just on the parent's idea of what's in the best interest, or is it more of a conversation between the parent and the school? Because within districts, and I come out of Nashua, you have some schools that have more supports in the school due to use of federal grants, such as the Title I grant. You have some schools that have a lot of reading intervention and math intervention supports. And if you have a student who needs that kind of support in elementary school because they're lagging behind, but they're not an identified special education student, it may be best to keep them in a school where they can get that, as opposed to one of our other elementary schools where those supports don't exist. So is moving a child to a different elementary school within the city really in that student's best interest if they're not going to get the help they need? You have other schools where they have a behavior support program that maybe that student needs, and maybe they're not an identified special education student because that's still something that the school and the parent are working through, whether that's what the team agrees jointly to do, because parents are an integral part of the student's education. And this bill, if passed, would discourage parents and school staff, including administration, to work together as a team, because it would put all of the decision-making power really on the parents. I want my kid to move, you shall move for them. It really unbalances the equation and requires schools to do whatever the parent wants. Let's see. So yeah, so it can move the student away from needed supports. It circumvents the discussion of what's in the full discussion of what's in the best interest of the student, things that the parents may not be aware are available in the schools. And, because our school districts do rely on property taxes, local property taxes so much, there could be a lot of costs that are not apparent that are incurred when you move a child, particularly from one district into another district, such as paraeducator support that is not considered in this bill. Other school staff, you get several children moving in, you might need additional lunchroom help, might need additional recess monitors, all these other things that become part of the cost of running the school that you need to take on when you have more students, transferred in. I do appreciate that the timeline in this bill says the end of the year, so you don't encourage moving in and out during the year. However, the budget process is going on now. Schools are building their budget and presenting them to their deliberative bodies in March, April, May. So it is out of sync there, and that's something that needs to be considered, because you would be building in an opportunity and perhaps an encouragement to move students by announcing it in July when the budget has already been set. And therefore you are increasing the cost to taxpayers if it's a move between districts, or you are looking at having to cut back on programming that's offered. So there's some problems here, and we are definitely opposing all of these bills, because the real thing is we need to make sure that all of our students in all of our schools have the same opportunity for that great public school education. That's a problem that has to be solved here with the funding. And that's what I have to say. I'm
Thank
not
you.
sure I can add anything to it, but if you have questions, I'll give it a try.
Any questions?
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. My question is specifically about students and receiving special education. So when a student is, and I'm going to use my own district because it's fresh. If a student is attending an elementary school in East Kingston, and then they want to go to another district over to Exeter, right? And that is, according to this, all you got to do is sign up, right? That student in East Kingston receives special education services. The programs that are available in East Kingston differ than what is available in Exeter. When that student goes over to Exeter, it's my understanding that the way special education evaluations are required to be done is that the school where the student is does an evaluation and determines the best way for them to meet this child's needs. And so that determination could be different in the Exeter school than it was in the East Kingston school, because they are also taking into account that which they have available, right? So if a child moves from East Kingston, decides, I want my kid to go to Exeter, and the cost for providing the necessary special education is more than it was in East Kingston, is East Kingston on the hook for the new costs over in Exeter? Or are the Exeter taxpayers picking that up, the difference?
It would not happen quite that fast, but yeah, I mean, there would be a reevaluation once the student is in place. So obviously the IEP is a legal document and would
Right.
travel with the student, and that would be in place, but the new school that they're transferring into would review it and hold a team meeting and look at the supports that were in that document and consider if they think it is adequate. So it is not a unilateral decision of the receiving school, but it would indeed be reviewed at some point. Yeah.
Follow up.
I mean, there's an annual
they-
review process with any IEP, so
But there are
it could,
cost differentials.
it could indeed cause a cost differential. Yes.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Any other
Sorry, I
questions?
got lost in the weeds of IEP process. Special ed parent.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there anybody else in the audience that has anything to add to this particular bill? That concludes the hearing on SB 97.
Did we have any written testimony from any of the people that were there? Oh, it's over there. Okay. Thank you. Usually we get flooded with paper, flooded with paper.
I know.
And I thought, this is all my own doing. I didn't get stuff from other people. Thank you. Just this one. Okay, great.
We're gonna now open the hearing
Chair.
on SB 90. Thank you.
Welcome.
98. And Senator Waters is the prime sponsor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator David Waters, District 4, introducing Senate Bill 98, which extends the donations to regional career and technical education center programs. You will see in the bill that it changes the repeal date from 2026 to 2031. I thought when this was originally passed back in 2019, it would be good to have a repeal date so we could evaluate the success of the program and then extend the tax credit further along. I'll just take a brief moment to explain what this program does. You can look in Chapter 188 E9A to see the full program described, but the basic principle of it was to find a way to forge connections between industries, businesses, and others for whom CTE centers might be educating future workers. And so what the program does is it provides a tax credit up to 50% of the donation for employee time, so that it might be that the students are instructed at the business, or someone from the business comes in and instructs them, the students, how to use particular manufacturing machinery or other thing that is might eventually be at their work site, or if there's apprenticeships and internships that involve payment for a student intern, and we have a lot of students who go to work at businesses who are CTE students to get that training. And so 50% of that can be provided through the tax credit program, and of course the donation of real property, which usually takes the place of the machinery, the auto dealers, advanced manufacturers, and others who will provide the latest machinery into the CTE so the students can get trained on that. The rest of the statute describes the procedures and rules that have been set up at the DOE. I asked Jeff Beard to provide a listing of the businesses and the CTEs that have taken advantage of it. You'll see even from the physical note that over the years, as the program became more known and directors of CTEs understood how they could use it for their students, its uptake has increased. Pinkerton Academy, the Real Get Go director down there, has just done an extraordinary job to help equip laboratory and to forge those partnerships. I think the second part of this program, what I hoped would happen when we established, was primarily Representative Ladd and I, who have worked together on CTs now for 12 years, was that yes, the tax credit is nice, but the add-on to that is that what you were doing is using it to forge a relationship with an employer, so that it is an opportunity for those sector partners that they have to communicate with through CTEs to develop a relationship that can go far beyond what a tax credit program will do, into hiring into the business, other kinds of connections and relationships, and potentially even some people working the business side. Maybe I'm ready to leave the business and go and become an instructor at a CTE. So I believe there's some other folks who can describe more details about, which CTE centers have done what with it. And I think it's a really worthy program, and I think it's passed its test, and that's why it was time to bring in a bill to extend the deadline to 2031. So thank you, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Questions from the members? I don't
Thank you
see
very
any.
much.
Thank you very much.
I do
Senator
have to
Waters.
dash back to hearing, so if anything else comes up, let me know. Thank you.
Jerry Frew, do you want to speak to this one? No, you said no. Okay, your excuse. Is Dan Bennett here? No. I couldn't really tell whether Dan Bennett wanted to speak or not to speak. Anybody else in the audience would like to speak on this bill? If not, this concludes the hearing on SB 98. Are we in time for the other one? This is 10:35. Yeah, we can do that. We'll open up the hearing on 10:35. No, I'm sorry. No, the next hearing is at 10:35. And with SB 101. Thank you. And you can have these. And the prime sponsor is Senator Lang.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the Education Committee. It's nice to be back in the room. I spent so much time in last term. Senate Bill 101 is before you. This is a simple bill, although great policy change. The bill is a universal public school choice bill. It does four basic things. I'm going to run through the four basic things real quick, and then I'll get into a little more detail in the actual bill itself. So first, the bill says that any public school student in New Hampshire can go to any public school in the state of New Hampshire. It says that if a student leaves their resident district, that the parents are obligated for transportation costs. It says that we handle special education costs the same exact way. I did not reinvent the wheel in this case. Currently, when a public school student leaves to go to a public charter school, there's a process for that. I use that same exact process in this bill, that if a public school student leaves, we follow the same process that is current law dealing with how we deal with special education when a student goes to a public charter school. We deal with some capacity issues in this bill, which I'll run through. And we deal with denials. What happens when can a school deny a request for a child entering the bill? And I deal with some state funding. The simple state funding says that for the purposes of state aid, the student is calculated in the resident district. For the purposes of funding the transfer, the average cost of a given district is the tuition amount allowed to be transferred. So, and I'll talk in detail more about that to the receiving school. So let's run through the bill. I'm just going to run a little bit page by page and talk about a little bit what's in here. On page 2, around line 21, we established a basic principle that any public school student go to any public school within the state of New Hampshire. On the next paragraph right under that, under section 2, starting on line 27, we talk about capacity, allowing schools to develop a capacity plan so that if the school reaches capacity, they can actually deny later on a student that's requesting to transfer in from an out of district. And it outlines that they have to set based on capacity based on the school and the capacity based on grade, and then keep that updated monthly so parents can look at a website and find out whether or not, if they want to transfer a student in, does that school have capacity to take my child? On page 3, on line 17, we talk about denials. When a receiving school can deny a public school transfer, the first one is kind of obvious. If a student's already been expelled from a public school, they can't transfer into another public school to get back in. The second one is if the student has a documented history of behavioral issues. The third one is if a student has chronic absenteeism, has large truancy. And the last one is at the capacity issue. Is the school at capacity, in which case they can deny the transfer. right underneath, under section 9 on line 27, we talk about transportation. This is where, again, we say that if a parent chooses to take their child out of a resident district, the parent is then obligated for the responsibility of the transportation costs. We go down onto the fourth page under line, starting in line 19, talking about funding. And it says just exactly what I said, that the tuition amount is the average cost of the resident district. So again, if District A's average cost is $20,000, that's the maximum tuition that a parent can take to go to any other school. If they go to another school, they go to school B, and District B's average tuition cost is higher, the parent's obligated to pay tuition and go to that public school, and they'll pay the difference. If the average cost is lower in school C, and the parent chooses that school, the resident district gets to keep the difference. So if it's a $20,000 cost and B is a $24,000 cost, the parent has an obligation to pay a $4,000 tuition into school B to attend that school. So it has no impact on the taxpayers in that receiving community. If, on the other hand, going into the third school is lower and it's only $17,000, the resident district gets to keep the extra $3,000 for its operational expenses and whatever else. And then lastly, at the very bottom of the page on page 4, we just talk about the state funding. For the purposes of ADMR, the students are always calculated in their resident district for the purpose of state aid. Wow, that's the bill. Big policy, really short conversation. I'm happy to take questions. Again, I want to remind the committee, and we have this conversation a lot about, the cost of schools and buildings and electricity and everything else. Let's not forget the fundamental principle of education. It's education of the child. What's best for the child, the best education. One of the reasons I brought this bill forward is actually a public school teacher approached me and asked me to put the bill in. And the reason was their district could not hire a music teacher. And they were struggling, and they ended up cutting the music program back to meet the minimum adequacy requirements. However, their children loved music. And yet there was no option to transfer to another school. That in and of itself would not have been a manifest hardship just because their child loves music and they want to transfer to another school. So in this instance, we have a choice here. We can say, tough luck, you're going to have to do without your music program, science program, math program, pick your poison, pick your educational topic. You're going to have to suck it up, buttercup, and your child's not going to get the education that was best for them. Or we can say, let's think about the child. Let's do what's best for the child. Let them transfer into whatever school. The parent takes that responsibility of transportation on and takes the responsibility of that and thinks that's best for their child. Let's do what's best for the child. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Lang. So, although I support the concept, I do have some concerns about the criteria in which they can refuse a child, because sometimes the tardiness or the habitual missing school is because of a situation that's happening in the school that they're currently attending, bullying and other situations. Also, if they've been expelled from a public school, there may be extenuating circumstances in that environment that they were in that they won't have in the next environment. So the kids that are excluded might be the kids that exactly need this program.
Sure. So again, if you look at line 17 on page 3, the school district may deny. It's not an absolute, right? So again, the school district is absolutely, the receiving school district can absolutely talk to the parents, find out why a given situation happened, and they may deem that is in fact the case, that it's the school that was in that caused either caused the truancy or caused the behavioral problems or caused the expulsion, and they're willing to take that child on. So again, there's not a shall in here. It just gives the receiving districts a may. Let them make the determination and go from there.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Ward. Senator Lang, good to see you again. And I think that we can agree on the 2 years that we spent in this room together that we both have the best interests of children in mind. We just have different ways of getting there. So I just want to put that out there at the top. My first question was the why, and you've now already answered that about the approach that you had from, I believe it was from a teacher, correct?
That was one of the, yes.
Okay, because essentially, so I wanted to know why is, in the why follow-up, is this essentially dissolving the lines between communities when it comes to their schools and school districts?
So thank you
Like
for the
no more borders. It's like, just go wherever you want.
for the purposes of enrollment, sure. So again, the default is you go to your resident district. That's the default. If you want to leave your district, we provide an option in how to do that and how you can go. And that's what this bill does. Says that you can go, if I'm in Winnisquam and for some reason I want to go to Franklin, whatever reason, that there's a pathway and a way for me to do that without manifest hardship and all the other requirements we force parents to go through in order to change districts. By default, we're saying, no, that's no longer the case. If you think it's in your best interest of your child to go to a different public school for whatever reason, we're going to give you a pathway to do that. And we're going to allow that.
Oh,
My next question, I don't even think I need to ask anymore because Senator Sullivan already did. I really feel, I wanted to understand why, and it says yes, may, but I think outlining these issue areas are some of the very same issue areas that get talked about when we're considering EFAs, best interest of the child, manifest educational hardships. And although fundamentally I'm not in favor of what we're talking about here in terms of, this agenda, I just want to point out that this language, I think just like cuts to the heart of kids that are struggling. And so if we're going to, dissolve borders and move around in the best interest of the child, these are some of the reasons that we've heard. I've sat next to you and we've heard them, and you brought it up, so thank you. I think so that's number 3. I want to put that on your radar. Number 4, and then I promise I'll stop for now.
go ahead.
Okay, so Senator Lang, I think one of the unintended consequences of something like this, and maybe you don't consider, maybe some don't consider it a consequence, but I do, is that this might not always be used for educational purposes. Like we talked about music, and I consider music education, but let's talk about sports. There are some communities that have like an incredible sport, an incredible hockey team. And I know this from my own district, they want their kids to play with that particular hockey team, and they will tuition them in to do that. It seems like that, that we should be not, I'm concerned that the unintended consequence of this is getting away from the educational needs and could allow a pathway for, athletic selection to move people to children to different districts where they want to get on a team to get, maybe a better athletic experience, but that could create an inequity that I'm not comfortable with.
So thank you for the question. So again, my statement on that is pretty simple, is that I was a athlete in high school, and I was not the greatest academic performer, but I made sure my academic performance was good enough so I can play on my sports team, because that was important to me. And that was one of the motivators for me as a child, is to be able to play. So again, going into what's the best interest of the child, if that moving to that school, like gets them on a hockey team, maybe your school doesn't have a hockey team and they want to play hockey. So they transfer to a school to be able to play in that. And that excites them about education. It keeps them in school, keeps them engaged. Isn't that still in the best interest of the child?
Do you want to answer it?
I think it could be argued that it's in the best interest of the child, but should not be the primary reason for dissolving borders and moving children between school districts if you want to have a tiered system of triage for why they go. And, keeping up your grades so that you can participate in the sport is different than being like, they've got the best program. It is a feeder program into a particular university or, hockey league that I want to get into or football league that I want to get into is very different in my mind. And these things actually are talked about and do happen. So I see this almost like opening that free pathway. So good for working hard to stay in sports. I think we have to be careful about why the movement is taking place. That's all for now. Thank you, Senator Lang.
Again, my inclination on this bill and reason why I put the bill forward is focusing on the best interests of the child, right? When the parents determine what the best interest of the child is, and maybe it is a sports focus, maybe it's a music focus, maybe it's a math focus, maybe it's a science focus, whatever that is, if the parent makes the determination that for my child, this is going to excite them about education and keep them engaged and keep them involved, I want to open that pathway and make it available.
Do you have a question?
I do.
Senator Altshuler?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. And I think that we can both stipulate that everybody here in this room genuinely wants what's in the best interest of children, right? And we do this job because for the amazing pay that we do it for, because we genuinely want all of our children in New Hampshire to have opportunity and to have the best education possible. Does this bill not exacerbate the problem of the haves and the have-nots? And specifically, using your example of this particular school cut a program, and if our schools across the state were receiving the same kind of adequate education funding from the state and not solely reliant on a commercial tax base in their towns and a property tax level that could sustain a music program, wouldn't we want to do something that would affect giving everybody the opportunity, not just the kids who have the capacity, whose parents have the capacity to get them over to another school? And I want to bring in Senator Prentice's point, and I also floated this bill. I don't know if you were in the room earlier. I floated my education bills by all my superintendents. Like, tell me how you read this. I want to hear it like through your point of view, and some school board members. And does this not also set up, because I'm looking at page 5, where a school may receive financial aid, private gifts, grants, or revenue as if it were a school district? Are we not creating a space where I want my kid to play Division I football, and I live in Raymond, but I want my kid to play, so Raymond High School, I believe is D3, because it's smaller. It's just by enrollment. But now I'm going to take that kid out and drive them over to Exeter because I have the resources to drive that kid over to Exeter. Exeter has to take it. And Exeter, because they're a D1 school and they're very good at football, now they can start taking gifts, they can take gifts to start recruiting for their program. How does this not set up a recruitment for these programs? Because, hey, I can pull kids. You can go to school anywhere across the state. So I want to pull that kid and that kid and that kid. And now we're creating a bigger gap between the haves and the have-nots.
Great. Thank you for the question. So funding, right? That's the argument. Funding, right? So while we're arguing about funding, there are kids that could be doing better in school because if they had choice. And I want that, right? If you remember, you voted for, if I remember right, last year, the budget, $169 million new to education funding last year, right? It was my education funding formula. I authored it, where we went even further to deal with the have and have-nots by creating the disparity aid that was in the budget that looked at equalized valuation per pupil and gave towns that have low equalized valuations much greater money. This year, it went up to $11,500 maximum addition to the adequacy aid if you were at the lower end of that scale and didn't have the equalized valuation base to be able to support your children. So again, just remember, and this is what I'm saying, well, we're sitting here arguing politics about school choice.
Policy.
There are students,
No,
hold on,
no.
if I can
Madam
finish answering my
Chair,
question.
Madam Chair. I'm sorry. I think we need to level set that this is not a political discussion. This is a policy discussion. And the questions are genuinely about policy, and that let level set to, like, we are all genuinely talking about policy, and we are not making political statements in this moment.
That's true. Okay.
Thank you.
Again, I'm just responding to the funding, which has been been a political football and the argument around funding, right? Again, we've been putting money in, but at the bottom end of this, at the in front and center should be the child and should be what's going on with the child. If a parent thinks that they can get a better education for their child by transferring schools to another public school, remember, we're not arguing about where the money's going. Public education money staying within public education, right? We're not arguing about taking the money out of public education. What we're arguing about is what we think is the best interest of the child, and do the parents who believe, whether you're going to use the sports argument, I'm going to use the physics argument. I'm going to say that this school has a better physics program, and my kid loves science, and I want to send him to that school and get him a much better science program than is available in my school. And if that's the case, then why are we saying no? Why would we continue to say no, that that child does not deserve the best education available by the state of New Hampshire? And if that means going to a different public school, then we should allow that.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Lang. As far as equity, would you agree that this is an equitable solution for children, especially that are in lower income neighborhoods or towns or cities, and that the opportunity that they could be presented by going, even if it's for sports, that elevates them into a different level, that allows them to get an education they could never achieve on their own, meaning the next level of college and university, and opportunities in their lives that they would not be permitted if they stayed in their original school district? Would you agree that this is an equitable solution for a lot of underserved kids and communities?
Yes, I can see how it could be viewed that way, yes.
Any other questions? One more?
One last one, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam
Senator
Chair.
Altschuler.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to ask the question that you asked, and you know, in the spirit of comedy, be able to acknowledge each other's points of view. And while I wholly understand why not this child in this moment get exactly what they need, I am so right there with you. As a parent, I also felt like that. And we all work with school boards who want to do that for all of the children in the school district. And as senators, we want to do it, I believe, for all of the student in the state. So why wouldn't we then elevate that to creating those music and sports opportunities everywhere? Right? Why wouldn't we want to do that so that a student in Berlin has the same kind of opportunities to take physics, right? And to play music and create a funding situation that all of the students get opportunity, not just the ones who live in property rich towns. So, you know, I think, why wouldn't we want to do that?
So thank you for the question. Again,
Yeah.
I think on the funding basis, we have increased funding, and we've focused it on those property poor towns to give them more aid than that was possible. But we don't control spending, unless that's what you're advocating for, is that the state take over spending in every school board and every school district, which I'm not sure that's what you're advocating for. We don't control how a school chooses to spend its money. That school chooses how it spends its money. That's how we have local control, and that's why we have local control. So again, I'm not sure you're advocating that the State Board of Education take over spending on at every school district level in order to equalize the playing field. But that wouldn't be something I would support. I believe I served on the school board for 6 years. I served on a school budget committee for 5 years. I understand funding choices as schools make based on the ability to pay. But I will tell you that at the state level, we've done that to create an equitable playing field. That equalized valuation disparity aid formula that I created, again, addresses the fact that we have property poor towns that struggle to pay, and we gave them more money.
Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Ward. And Senator Lang, again, coming at this, as I said, when I first started, started my, questioning and clarifications, is I believe I know I have the best interests of children, not only in my district, but throughout the state in mind. There are different approaches, and I'd just like that to be recognized, because I think that is essential. And sometimes those different approaches are how we get to success overall. With that being said, I'm just trying to understand. It seems like there's an agenda, like not I don't want to call it agenda, but there is an outline of here's what we want to do. But I'm trying to understand the plan outside of like how money will move, and again like who and who is not eligible. So has this and forgive me if I've missed something. Have there been any case studies of this? Has this come out of a study commission? I mean, how has, sometimes you have to work through scenarios to understand how this will actually go into action. So where are you with that?
Thank you for the question. Again, legislature's more than welcome to file a bill and go do a study commission. In the meantime, I want the kids taken care of now. Right? This bill is about taking care of the kids now, not about the legislature dragging its feet and doing study commission. I think in my history of being in the legislature, my 5th term, we've had 2, if not 3 study commissions on education funding that never reached to a goal and get there. I want the kids taken care of now. This bill would allow parents to go ahead and move their child to a school they think is better for their child, better for their family, and allow that to happen now. And the legislature can go about its business and figure out whether or not it wants to form a study committee.
May I? In direct response.
A quick response.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, a quick response. So it's not about whether I think there should be a study committee. I'm asking you if this has been studied at all. And this reference to, I understand you want this now, but we, in doing policy work, have to be thinking about like what it will look like now and what it will look like a year from now or 3 years from now. There's something in engineering that's called unintended consequences. And what I'd like to avoid for locals, for not just people in my district, but in all districts, is how this could actually play out. Maybe it'll work perfectly, but we don't know. So thank you for your interest in wanting to change things now. I understand that, but I would appreciate that it's not like if I'm asking a question about how this might work, that I don't want to help children in New Hampshire and their families.
Thank you. Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Lang, would you believe that there are 43 states in the country that already have some form of open enrollment, and it's a very successful program that has provided a leg up for a lot of kids?
Yes.
Thank you.
All set? Senator Altshuler, one more question? That'd be 2?
Depending on the, maybe if we can flesh some
You
stuff
see
out.
short answers.
Yeah.
Try.
No. We just, let's go deep. It's policy. Let's go deep. Thank you for taking my question. Thank you. What's unclear in here, and maybe I'm missing the spot, so if you can tell me where it is, awesome. But what I want to tease out, because we're talking about a policy implementation for the whole state, is that how are open slots determined? And how often how often are deadlines, where are the deadlines for the open enrollment? Or is it like, I want to move in October, or like,
Sure. Thank you.
how
So,
does this,
so
how does
page
this roll
2,
out? Thank
line
you.
27.
Thanks.
Each school district shall determine for each school in the district the capacity of each school and each grade level. A school district shall post a total capacity of each individual school in the district and the capacity of each grade level and the number of vacancies in each individual school in the district on the district website by the 1st of each month. Each school district in the state shall report annually to the State Commissioner of Education the number of transfer applications, acceptances, denials, and the reason for denials. The Department of Education shall publish the data annually on its website and provide reports to the Senate and House Education Committees and the State Board of Education. So there's where, again, schools will establish what their capacity is, and once they reach capacity, they have every right to say no.
May I follow up?
Follow up?
So in, thank you for pointing that out. I'm on line 32, where this is asking the schools to publish this on the 1st of each month. Is that indicating that there's there's no time frame under which a student can move. It can be any time during the year based on these monthly capacity numbers.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Again, there's no time frame when a student might move into your district at any point in time. They can come in and the school would take them. Doesn't matter that it's in November. Doesn't matter if it's in April. Doesn't matter if there's only 3 days left in school. The school district would accept that enrollment of that child coming in. This would be no different. However, at this case, the parents again would be able to look and say, I want to move from Winnisquam Regional School District, Winnisquam High School to Franklin High School. I can go to Franklin's High School and take a look at my kids in grade 10. Are there any vacancies in grade 10? And I would know, and if I know there's none, then the parent wouldn't be, that's not a transfer option that's available to them. But it would establish a process that allows parents to take a look if they feel they want to transfer their school into their child into a different school. There's a metric there. They could look at and see if it's even viable.
Can you follow up?
Follow up.
So if and I'm rolling with your idea that there's no boundaries. Anybody goes to school anywhere. But the funding would still be at the local level. So anybody can come to, in my district, the Strata Memorial School from anywhere based on capacity. And when people move into the district, if we're already at capacity with people who don't live in the district, do we have to just keep getting bigger, or is there like students who don't live in Stratum have to leave because our capacity, because we're paying for Stratum, like it's setting up who pays for this? Like, are we all paying at our own local city town level?
So we'll go over to the funding mechanism. It is in page 4.
Yeah,
Starting in line 20,
thank you.
right? For the transferring students to the pupil's resident district shall pay the receiving district the amount equal to the resident district's average cost per pupil as determined by the Department of Education using the most recent available data reported by the district to the department, provided that the receiving district's average cost per pupil is lower than the student's resident district average pupil cost, then the resident district shall retain the difference. If the transferring student's resident district average pupil cost is less than the receiving district's average per pupil cost, such difference shall be charged as tuition and paid by the pupil's parents or guardians to the receiving district at the start of each semester. So again, your district would receive the same exact money as if the kid came from Main Street versus came from Tilton, New Hampshire. The school district gets the same exact amount of money per pupil.
Can I follow up? Can I follow up, please?
Yes, one more
Thank you.
follow-up,
So,
please.
so we're determining on a monthly basis capacity, right? And when capacity is close to, we've got 2 spots left in the 4th grade, and I've got 6 families that want that spot. Is it up, like, who decides who gets the spots?
Sure. Thank you for the question again.
And would there be any preference given to the students who moved into the district? Like, are district students preferred students? Like, they get right of first refusal?
So again, under current law, students that move into your district have an absolute right to public education. They can't be denied. So if your capacity is 100 and you're at 100 and some developer builds 200 apartments in your house, you get another 50 kids, you have to deal with that, right? By law, you still have to accept all 50 kids, right? So when a student moves into your district, they absolutely must be able to attend public school within their district. That's current law.
Okay. Yes, I need to just a clarification that yes, that's current law, but when we're budgeting, which we're budgeting now, and you've had experience on school budgeting committees, when you're budgeting at the local level, you're able to take into account that which is happening within your district, knowing that, oh, we've got a new development going up, or, you can foresee some of these things. What you can't foresee is an influx of students from another town added on to what you have, and possibly creating a space where there's more kids in one grade that are from all over the place than from your own town, and now we're over capacity. It's just, what do we do when when it gets too big and you've got 2 spots, you got 8 kids that want to go there? Now what?
So again, I refer back to the capacity metrics that they put, that are in the bill, that requires the school to set their standard. I will tell you, as a school board member, we always look forward and we look at what's going on. Again, I'll also remind you that the demographic says that we're losing 1% of our students every year anyway, right? We've gone from over 200,000 kids 15 years ago-ish to 158,000 kids right now. Right. So again, student to school districts enrollment is already dropping, and yet very few schools are reducing their size. So they should be able to handle that capacity.
Any more questions from the panel? Thank you very much. Barrett Christina.
Madam Chair, I'm going to yield my time and follow up with the committee.
Okay, thank you. Jerry Frew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will try to be brief. Jerry Frew, Associate Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Administrators Association, Senate Apprentice. I must admit, I love the reference to hockey as a means of transferring. I'm just going to reiterate to this committee, based on the information that's been brought forward, that again, we need to pump the brakes to get it right. This is a complex piece of legislation, this bill in itself. We have several questions around capacity. For example, I didn't think it was possible that more reports could be required by the DOE. But if we had to post, if every school had to post and update monthly their enrollments by class and classroom, basically by classroom, that's a pretty significant expectation. So again, we think that there's an opportunity to work with folks to reach some reasonable guidelines around capacity itself. I'd also like to say that perhaps there might be some reasons for denial that we might like to see considered as part of legislation. These are significant, obviously, but how about classroom dynamics? And if school administration has determined that a certain number of children is where they want the student-teacher ratio to be because of classroom dynamics, are they forced to add another child? Again, I'm looking at small rural districts. We have twin grandchildren. If they decide to move, their family moves to a small rural district, there's going to be 2 of them in any classroom that gets them. And so does that force some staffing decisions, or I'm sure that our grandchildren are perfectly behaved, but what if they weren't and added some additional burden to that receiving system? Enrollment bubbles, I believe it's been brought out. We've done a lot of enrollment studies as an association with a lot of communities, but there are enrollment bubbles that go through. So how long is the commitment to accepting the child? For example, we have a 4th grade student that we accept as a receiving district because that is a choice of a family. Is that 4th grade student going to stay in that cohort group of 4th graders through grade 12? Is it a 1-year acceptance? Is it a K through 12 acceptance? How long, when a child openly enrolls, right? How long does that child allowed to stay in that cohort of students? Bring that up because budget planning, staffing, class sizes, all of those things have to be taken into consideration. Getting to the best interest of the child. We would assume that it would be in the best interest of the child to stay in that school situation with that cohort group of students for the duration of their school career, but that's not what this says. There's no guideline for what is this, what is the expectation, or what is acceptable. Again, some guidance is what we would look for. Again, lines 34 through 37 raise some questions around the transportation issue that I brought out earlier. I won't belabor that point, but I believe there's some contradictory language there, or at least language that could be perceived differently by different attorneys, and let's just leave it at that. And so again, we are happy to work with this committee, with any committee, to hopefully a study committee to look at all of these bills and try to come up with some solution that works in the best interest of kids, which we all want. There's nobody in this room or any other room that doesn't have best interests of kids foremost in their mind. Also, best interests of taxpayers, best interests of staff, and really student success and achievement is the bottom line of all of it. And I think we all want the same thing. We just have to work closely together to make sure that it happens in a good way.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Deborah House.
Good morning again, Chairman Ward. Nice to be here at Senate Education. I'm Deborah House, President of the American Federation of Teachers, New Hampshire, and I'm going to speak in opposition to this bill as well, for similar reasons that I opposed the earlier bill. We do oppose Senate Bill 101, and a lot of our opposition to this is because all of our Granite State children, all of them, deserve the opportunity of a great public school education. So just being able to move some of them from one school to another, the ones whose family can support them can transport them to, the nearest bus stop in the school they want to send them to, is not going to solve the problem. We need to actually look at the funding and get that right so that every single school can offer that great opportunity for a public school education with small class sizes, professional, knowledgeable teachers, all the academic and behavioral supports that students need so they can learn and thrive. Every student in the Granite State deserves the opportunity to have music class in school, to have that physics class in school, the advanced math. They all deserve it. So we shouldn't just be passing bills that is going to help a few students now, instead of solving the problem and getting it right for all of our Granite State students. Again, the best interest of the child, when you make it a shall, and then you put in an undefined term like that, you're putting a mandate on local schools to grant this. And you may be moving students away from sports that they have in one district that they're not going to have in another district, and then you're creating a cost for the district they're moving into. With a bill like this, front and center, we should be focusing on the students. And again, I said we should be focusing on all the students. But this also brings into the question, what about the taxpayers? You have just required, if you pass this, every single school district to agree to a tuition agreement, essentially, with every other school district, without the voters having a say in that agreement or a say in how the money that they're now sending somewhere else is going to be spent. So that's a huge change. Our schools are supported 70% with local taxpayer money. So now you have just said, yeah, your money's going over there because the student has decided they're going to transfer to schools, and we don't have any say over it. The state has said we have to do this. This is a state mandate that interferes with local control. And even though I believe the purpose of the bill is to help some students, the real thing we need to do is focus on meeting our constitutional duty to all our Granite State students. They all deserve the opportunity for a great public school education, and we need to make sure that all of our public schools have enough funding from the state to support the learning needs of all of our students. And that is what I have to say. Thank you.
I have a comment.
Yep.
You're talking about that each school should have the same program, extracurricular program, and the same curriculum. I am going back to my background, which is in healthcare. We have small clinics, small hospitals. We have tertiary hospitals because they found out it was just too expensive to outfit each little tiny hospital with all this stuff that would be necessary if you really had some problems. So it seems to me that if you're looking at the whole school education program, there are places where you cannot have every single program in every single school. It just doesn't make economic sense. So it seems to me if you have a constituency that really values in Senator Lang's, but music, and somebody else is concentrating on science, you should have the ability to move between. I think to expect each school to have the same programs everywhere to educate each child in whichever program he or she would like to have, I think is very unrealistic, but just from an economic sense and just looking at how things are done from a business point of view.
Well, I would like to respond to that. If we could meet the basic level of student needs all across the state so that they had a robust education that prepared them for workforce, for going into the service, for going on to higher education, for full participation in civic life past graduation, if we could have that in all our public schools. So that does include that you have to have, some upper level science and math available taught by a certified, trained professional in your high schools, not remotely, not by uncertified part-time teachers coming in. So you'd have to have those basics in all of your public schools. And that does include you have to have arts in your elementary schools too. Those are not optional. That's part of being a well-rounded, full educated student. Then we could maybe talk about developing magnet schools. Maybe this school wants to be the STEM school that goes really heavy into the advanced sciences, and that one wants to be the arts school. This bill would be great if we had all of those basics covered. We don't. And that's due to 30 years of the legislature here failing to meet its constitutional obligation to all Granite State students. So let's talk about meeting the needs of all the students
Well,
before we start giving some of them
Let's take
escape hatches.
Let's take a good hard look at how education is provided in all the schools in New Hampshire. I mean, it's a huge subject, but I think we need to be realistic in what we can do at each level and each town. And I go back to the tertiary hospitals and the small towns clinics, and they can't all do a gastroenterology department. That they send them to somewhere else that is all set up for that. And I just go back to the same thing again, that it's unrealistic to expect that each little school, wherever they are, should have everything available to the child in order to be a well-rounded school and what is it, the word you use? Follow their constitutional obligation.
Well, they're all Granite State citizens. They all have that right. You're going to deny them
but-
rights?
Yes, but you have a right. You have a right to the experience and to the education, but does it have to be at this place? Could you go to that place to get whatever you need to
But
expand?
how is a working single mother in a small town going to be able to take advantage of an opportunity like this when she can't drive her child to a bus stop and 30 miles away
I think
to
that's,
get a child into a different school?
I think that's getting into something different.
Well, it's something in this bill.
No, we're talking about somebody who wants to do it. Okay, it's a choice. You
Every
don't
school
have
has to offer the opportunity. That's the
Well,
fix.
Obviously, this is a conversation that we have to continue to talk
Okay.
about.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We agree that.
Yep.
Senator Sullivan.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. To Senator Ward's point, some schools just are small schools. They couldn't have a football team. They couldn't have a band. They just don't have enough children to fill all those spots, right? But my question, left me. My question left me. I apologize. I apologize.
It's getting late.
I apologize. If it comes back, I'll
Okay. Well, we're getting close to the witching hour here.
Oh, I remember. I'm sorry.
Be out in 20 minutes.
I remember.
sit back.
I apologize. So, you've testified and said that we are not providing an adequate education, and you keep referring back to the cost. We currently, according to the Department of Education, are spending an average of $21,000 per child in this state. What would you say is the cost of an adequate education?
So that is an average across the state. And if you listened carefully to what I said the state is not funding its share appropriately. So you are lumping together what local taxpayers are paying with what the state is paying. And you're also averaging across all towns. Some towns spend a lot more. Some spend less than that. So you're averaging together the two. What I'm saying is the state is not providing enough, so districts are not able to fund all of the support students need in every district so that they can learn and thrive and have a robust, complete curriculum and program. Yes.
So I'll just ask, what is that number to you?
What is that number? So I'm not going to average it for the whole state, but the state share of it probably should be somewhere in the range of $10,000 per student to ease the burden on local property taxpayers. That's calculations that were arrived at through one of the study commissions in recent years, as well as through some of the testimony that came out in the lawsuits in the previous year. Although the court did settle on a lower figure as the absolute bare minimum, and you guys are not even close.
So if you're saying that $10,000 could provide an adequate education
No, for the state share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Now, David Trumbull.
Good morning, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is David Trumbull. I'm from the town of Ware. I have a few questions about this bill. 3 questions. First is, does this new legal right actually, how does it work, and does it remove local control, and does it with it bring continuity? The way the law works is that the schools will define the capacity, but it doesn't define how schools define capacity. So could they say building size? In other words, this building can handle so many people, or can the school district instead say, we're going to base it on our staffing? At my school district recent board meeting, they said in the old days they would get 10 applicants per job. Now they're lucky to get 1 or 2, and those applicants are usually beginner teachers. There's only so many beginner teachers that you can have in a school and still have a functioning school. So that means, and plus you would need paras. And then you have the class size issue. So can a town change its capacity under this law if it says it's not a question of the building size, it's a question of what we think that we can handle in our school? But then how does that bump up against this new right? So if a child comes into a town in one of these slots for grade 5, then the next year the town says, well, we had a whole lot of new 4th graders come up. Our middle school is full. We don't have enough teachers. We can't find enough staff. We're going to lower our capacity. Does that child who came in grade 5 now no longer be able to attend that school, or do they have a legal right to attend that school? Or do the students who live in that town have priority? So if the capacity changes, does the student who came in for 1 year lose their rights? So now that child no longer has continuity of their education. They're going to have to go find another school and bounce around. It's not clear in this statute if there's preference for residents. Also, the sponsor indicated he wants to do what's in the best interests of each child. If we're going to do this as the best interests of every single child in the state, then the state should provide the funding, because what this bill essentially does is it says the state's going to run all the schools in the state as like little franchises. They're all little FedExes that have to fall into an exact capacity category, but the local governments still control. Now, you asked the question, do other states do this? Is it that they do open enrollment within the same district, or do they have it anywhere in the state? So if Illinois does this, does this mean you can go to any school in the state of Illinois, or is it just within your school district? Also, it's worth noting that we are the lowest percentage of state funding of any school, any state in America. So if this might work somewhere else where the state actually provided the funding, it doesn't work in New Hampshire because the state provides the least level of funding in New Hampshire. So if you're going to do this, the first step, kind of the chronology of solutions, would be to have the state provide the adequate funding to every school, guarantee that they would do that for every single child in all the schools. Then you could implement something like an open enrollment program. But to force open enrollment when you have local funding, it just doesn't make sense because the local communities have to be able to budget. Second problem I have with this is that it's going to result in inherent discrimination on income, disability, and race. First of all, let's assume academics is the core reason and not sports. Some towns in the state can only spend $15,000 per student. Others spend $25,000, $28,000, or over $30,000 per student. A lot of parents might say, oh, I want to send my child to the school that spends twice as much as the town I'm in now does. If they do that, they would be on the hook personally to pay the additional $15,000. So I go from a 15,000 town to a 30,000 town. Obviously, families of low income are not going to be able to afford that. This bill would inherently discriminate against all families who could not afford to have their child go to that better school. And there were questions, well, wouldn't it be nice if we want to do what's good for that child, they want to go to that better school? Also, the transportation costs. The parent is going to have to be responsible to transport their child to that school, pick them up if they participate in after-school activities. Transportation is not easy to do if you only have one working car for a family of two and one person's using it to go to work every day. This bill would, not saying it's intended to discriminate against low-income families, but in its practice, it would discriminate against low-income families. Another reason that's allowed to be exempted is disciplinary issues. And I'm sure you all, being on the Education Committee, know that disciplinary issues are not simply based on random factors. They has a lot to do with income and race and disability. The UNH Carsey Center did a study on New Hampshire's expulsion and suspension practices. And I'll just read you this one little thing from it here. It says, they looked at all the different factors that could affect disciplinary issues. If a student is at low risk, she is a white female without a disability from a higher income family home attending a non-urban school. The likelihood she will experience exclusionary discipline is less than 1%. In contrast, approximately 1 in 3 male students of color with a disability who are free and reduced lunch eligible and attend urban schools will experience high exclusionary discipline. This statistic jumps to 1 in 2 if that student is also homeless. And there's numerous other studies. The Concord Monitor reported on one a couple of years ago looking at New Hampshire's data, and they indicated that students of color with disabilities were 5.5 times as likely to be suspended as a non-disabled white student. So the bill is not intending to discriminate against children of color or children with disabilities. In fact, there's a provision in here that it doesn't discriminate on IEPs, but it allows denials based on disciplinary issues. Another denial can be based on absenteeism. There's a lot of factors that cause absenteeism, but insecurity of housing and insecurity of food are major factors in student chronic absenteeism. So again, this bill would discriminate against low-income families, not designed to, but in practice, they would not be able to take advantage of this opportunity. The third issue I have concern with this is that this bill does not address the fundamental issue of funding inequality in the state. Instead, it accepts that inequality and says, well, we can't do everything for everybody. It's not realistic. But if a kid really wants to study physics, they can go find a school that has it. Or if they really want to study music, they can go over there to that school. That goes against the Claremont decision, which says that every single child in this state has a constitutional right to an constitutionally adequate education. That went to the Londonderry decision. Came back. The commission report wrote 193EB in more detail and outlined everything it has to be taught. And it includes the arts and music and physics and English. Every single child in the state can't just doesn't have the right to just want it. They have a legal constitutional right to get it in their own home school. It shouldn't be that kids over here get physics and kids over there get music. Every child in this state has the right to all of those. That is our constitutional duty. Lastly, there was some testimony about how you increased aid to towns that have property tax issues in the last budget. But to fund that, you got rid of the stabilization grant program. Now, you only took out 20% for the first 2 years, but in the next 2 years, it's 20% more. The next two, another 20, then another 20, then another. In 10 years, it's gone. That is a huge program that helps the towns that have the least amount of ability to pay for their schools. In my town, our school board just reported that in this 2-year cycle alone, net, after you add up all these pluses and minuses, we're losing just a little bit shy of between $400,000 and $500,000 per year. That's only with the first 2-year hit. We're going to get hit with that again in years 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7, 8, and 9 and 10. We're going to lose over $2 million. So it was good that you tried to increase aid in some areas, but you funded it by taking away a program that actually guaranteed funding. So we're nowhere near providing this constitutional level of education. Until you do that, that should be the first step. Once you've done that, and every child can then say, wow, I have had music in my town. I can stay with my friends. I don't have to go to school over there. I've got physics in my town. I don't have to go to school over there. Then you can adopt open enrollment. But the first step should be to make sure that every child gets that education in the present system. Thank you.
Any questions from Senator Sullivan?
Thank you, Senator. Thank you for taking my questions. You stated that this is inherently discriminates against low-income and underserved children. I would say that, would you agree that the way that the public school system is currently set up, segregating children by zip code, that it currently inherently discriminates against children, low-income, underserved, and minority children?
Thank you for your question, Senator Sullivan. I think the issue is that the state is mandated by the Constitution to fund the public schools. We haven't ever lived up to that in the state. We only fund at the state level 20 to 30%. 70, 80% is funded by the local government. So to the extent the answer is yes to your question, that we do discriminate right now in the present system, it's because the state has failed to do its job that it's been required to do by the court 3 times, and then there's a 4th one going to be coming, a couple of more decisions coming along soon. So if we are discriminating, it's because you, and I don't mean you personally, but I mean you as the legislature, have failed to do what you've been required to do.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anybody in the audience who has something to say before we close? I have 10 more minutes. I have to be out of here.
Sorry, I apologize. I got here late and couldn't sign in. But thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify here today. My name is Sarah Scott, and I'm the Deputy State Director with Americans for Prosperity here in New Hampshire. I'm here in support of SB 101, which expands open enrollment opportunities in New Hampshire's public schools. Really, I don't want to repeat too much of the testimony that's already been said, but SB 101 is about one simple and yet transformational idea, and that's that parents know what's best for their child. We've talked a lot about families looking elsewhere based on curriculum, but I wanted to highlight one of the conversations we haven't had yet that is about families looking for other reasons beyond just curriculum. So, for example, there are many families that do struggle with things like childcare. They might have family in the town next door that is helping with childcare. We should be able to give those families an opportunity to send kids to school in those other districts to help them with issues like that. We have other issues like teachers who are in a district that might not be where they live. If they had the ability to bring their children with them to the school, I think you'd see a lot more families that are able to make things work. Sometimes bus times can be really difficult. So I think we've missed some of the conversation that this isn't just about academics. And I think we need to talk more about the cultural side of things and the social side. This can give a lot of opportunity for families who might live on the outer boundaries of a district, so they might actually be geographically much closer to another school. So I just want to raise those points, but aside from that, I really do agree with a lot of the testimony from Senator Lang and would love to see this bill move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the legislators? Okay, no questions.
Thank you.
Well, there's no question about that. This is a huge issue, and we need to have a lot of discussions and a lot of input from all kinds of people so we can get this right. Thank you very much for coming, all of you. And this closes the hearing.
Senators, I just want to bring to your attention that Declan had passed out the original, what was existing law for 193.3, where you can see that private schools are already part of that. That pertains to the
Which
bill
is
that I had sponsored. that I
This
brought
one
forward.
here?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Senator.